continuing on this discussion of politics, a big part of politics is language and communication. How we talk about social issues, different communities, and the words that we use to describe them can have just as much, if not more, of an impact than the actual ideas themselves. And one phrase that keeps popping up in the news, especially from right-wing news media, is this fear-mongering over the term critical race theory.
Oh,
Now,
I'm glad that you're asking me about that.
now they, you know, we're at this point now where it's like, you know, like we understand the complexity of critical race theory, but now they're just calling it CRT for shorthand, and it just feels so dismissive because again, there's just so many social issues that are wrapped into critical race theory.
Yeah.
But as somebody who does rhetorical and political analysis, you're able to look at the politics, and you're also able to look at the words that are constructing these political discussions. What's your read on what's happening right now with the term critical race theory? Like, because a lot's happening nationwide on
Yeah.
so many different fronts, whether you're talking about education, whether you're talking about politics. Like, what's your assessment?
Um. uh, it's a mess, right? So I'm not from Arizona. I'm from California. So I grew up, right, my white
Mm-hmm.
suburb that I grew up in is outside of Los Angeles. So I grew up in Southern California. And I moved to Arizona I was 25, I think, 24, 25, something like that, somewhere around that age. And the landscape here is totally different, right? Like California and Arizona are like different countries, it feels like, because the culture is just so different. And so I live currently in a state where the superintendent of the state banned ethnic studies at the high school level, right? So like, so there is this school here where folks in the community, they organized, and one of the high schools actually, like, they actually were able to get ethnic studies to be taught in high school. Like they made it, like, I think it was like elective courses that folks were able to take, because a lot of the students were like, we keep on learning about white people and all the things that white people are doing, but we're not learning about like what, Black folks, Latinx people are doing. So there's a lot. So people in the community organized, they got that to change. And they saw that there was a change, it was a positive for the students of color, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
that these young students of color were like, their grades improved, like their writing improved, because there was just another way to engage them as students where they felt exciting, and when they were seeing people who looked like them being empowered, right? So I live in a state where like they banned that shit, and like they banned it, like the ban happened like recently, and I want to say in the last like, I think in the last like 10 years that happened. I think the ban may have happened in 2013 or 2014. So like when I had first gotten here, and I wasn't like plugged into organizing, so I didn't know like all of the tea about everything. And so it is not shocking to me that the right would create this new moral panic around critical race theory, because I live in a state where they literally did something, like they did something similar on a smaller scale using similar like rhetoric, right? They were like, the things that they're being taught are divisive. The things that they're being taught is un-American. They're being taught to hate America. And I'm just like, no, they're not. They're being taught to think critically about what the United States has presented itself as, and then what that reality has been, and who has that been real for. And so I want to bring into this conversation, I want to bring two other things into this conversation because I feel like they're relevant, right? So one of them is, I was on Twitter which I love being on, by the way. Like Twitter is like this amazing and terrifying place, right?
Yes.
It is both like, so it is both, it brings me so much joy, and also there's a lot of horrific things that exist on Twitter simultaneously. And I experience both of them daily. And so do you remember I can't think of her name, and I feel really shitty for not remembering her name, but the journalist who was supposed to get hired at, I think it's UNC, Chapel Hill, and then they were just like, ooh, JK Lowell, we don't want to hire you anymore because like the board of trustees was like, yes, you went through the tenure process and we were going to hire you for our department, but they were like, JK Lowell, we don't want to hire anymore because you being here feels political, because she's the one who authored the 1619 project.
Okay. I think I
I
know
don't
what you're
remember
talking
her
about.
name, and I feel really bad for not remembering who she is, because I also follow her on Twitter, so this makes it even worse. So she posted. So I'm following her. She retweeted something about the 1619 project, and so I'm reading the tweets and reading the conversation, because this I feel like this is actually a really important piece of how I create my analysis. Is I'm literally looking at like, what are people saying, like what are the patterns of behavior that folks are participating in? What are the talking pieces that folks are using? What am I seeing people repeating over and over and over again to know, oh, these folks don't actually know what the fuck they're talking about. They're literally parroting phrases that they have heard from somewhere else. So I get to a thread in the multiple threads that now exist in like this tweet, and there was this white man who said it. He said it so plainly, and the things that he said in his tweet are so chilling to me, because this is how insidious white supremacy is, and this man, he knows it, and I like it like I will think back on this interaction and it chills me, because I'm just like, these fucking people literally know what they're doing and they just do not care. So this man, he's like, he identified as like a libertarian, and he was like, yeah, I don't think he was like, I don't disagree necessarily with the project. He was like, I also don't necessarily disagree with CRT. He's like, I just think that we shouldn't teach young people that the United States is bad. He's all because then they won't want to defend it. And he's like, we need for people to love this country so they will die for it. And he was like, and we can't do that if people know that this country is actually a piece of shit and we're teaching them that when they're like children. He was like, we can teach them that the United States is this shit when they go to school. And so I was just like, so I responded, because I was like, bruh, I was like, as someone who works in education and does fucking diversity and inclusion work, and like literally is committed to trying to teach people how to think critically about the United States, what you are saying is so much more difficult than how you are laying it out. I was like, people literally come to school, they come to college and have spent their entire childhoods being indoctrinated, being told that the United States is this and this is what the history is, and race, everybody can participate in racism and all of this other shit. And I was like, and they are literally cause psychological distress when people tell them that these things that they have been told their entire lives are not true. And I said, and one of two things happens. Either they double down on their bullshit because they're like, I have been told for my entire life that the United States is the best country in the world, that there is freedom, that we are just and equitable, and meritocracy is real. I said, so they either double down on the shit that they have been taught their whole lives, because it's easier to do that than to open up their minds to learning and then having to reconcile everything that they have been told their entire lives being a lie. I was like, so you are literally saying that you're okay with people being lied to because you want for them to defend the country instead of them actually, one, being able to think about the things that this country is currently doing and has done in the past, and actually have the tools to be able to make the country be the country that they want for it to be. And he was like, yes. And I was like, and I was just like,
Oh my god. Yeah, it's like it's so frustrating when you have those situations because it's like, there's all, and I hate that it's not that I like hold out and hope for, the few white people who get it and I'm like, yay, like I'm like banking on them to save us. But, you know, there is always this feeling like, okay, well, at least there are some white folks who get it. And yet, you're bringing up, because the reality is this dude is not the only one who feels this way. There's just so many white people who identify as, oh, well, I'm a Democrat or I'm progressive. I care about these issues, blah, 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 blah. But when you really hold their feet to the fire and you ask, like, okay, but then do you think we should stop, imperializing other countries? Do you think that we should, stop celebrating Confederate history? So many of them just because they have also been indoctrinated by our same education system, but because they are white. And like you were saying before, when you're talking about that distinction of the people who get it during the workshops and those who don't, and the ones who don't get it are the ones who like they see, oh shit, like this is actually like this white privilege shit is actually good for me, and I actually don't want to distance myself from that.
yes,
And
yes,
and like you said, like your word choice is perfect. It's chilling. It's chilling because it's like, wow, you know what? Like you're the person who is already difficult to find, like someone who can just recognize and just at least acknowledge that this thing is real, that critical race theory is important, but
yes.
you still
You just
are,
don't give a fuck. You
yeah.
literally don't care because you don't, because it benefits you. And like the fact that this man said this on the internet where everyone can see it. And I screenshotted that shit too, because I was like, I need to keep this for my records so that I can, like, when I share this story, I don't want to like misinterpret what he said, because he was just like, yes, because people will not defend this country if they know how horrible it actually is. And I was like, and he's like, okay with that, right? And there has to be other people who share his sentiment, which is the other piece that I want to bring into this conversation. So today is 9/11, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it has been 20 years since 9/11 happened. And it's interesting being like, so I'm like, how old am I? I'm 33. I had to think for a second. I was like, how old am I? So I'm 33. I'm going to be 34 at the end of the year. And so I was 13 when 9/11 happened. So I was in seventh grade. And remembering, so it's always really weird being a person who does like political work, and like I majored in political science. And I also am a gender and women's studies major too. And like, being a person of my particular, like, who was growing up in the 2000s, right? And talking, like interacting with people who are older than me, right? Who are like whole ass adults who have lived through like multiple presidential administrations and have like lived through like multiple historic events, like seeing that, like there's also this weird disconnect about like how we remember things. And I think a piece of that is because like I have grown up, and like my generation of people, we have grown up like with the internet. So like there are all of these different ways that we can actually, like, we have much more power to document how we remember things, opposed to it being propagated to us and like being told like, or where there aren't a whole bunch of things like trying to help. I mean, there are a lot of things that try to help us misremember things, but we have other tools that are like, actually, no, this is what happened. And so being in this moment where it's 20 years later, what happened in Afghanistan happened like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And remembering that there were people who were like, we should not be going to war. What we're doing is nonsensical. And like for decades, people were like, this war is bad. This war should not have ever happened. This war should still not be happening. We continue as the United States to destabilize regions of the world, and we're doing it again. And for that to be part of the analysis that happened. And then this weird, like, there's also this disconnect that I have where like a lot of folks, well, not even a lot of folks, white people and people who, and like BIPOC people who are ambassadors to white supremacy have this like they have these feelings of patriotism to the United States because of 9/11. Whereas like, I feel like as like a young Black person who was growing up in a white suburb, 9/11, all it did for me was it just confirmed all of the ways that I had been taught that the America that I live in is very different than the America that other people occupy. 9/11 just like made that just more apparent to me. So I remember immediately how the rhetoric around certain things drastically changed, right? So like immigration, for example, it was sort of like I grew up with like knowing my mom like worked with undocumented people. I like knew I would like my mom was a single parent, and so I would like go to work with her a lot. So like I knew, you know, a lot of her coworkers, and like I was like being undocumented, like it's just a thing, right? Like it wasn't something that was like bad. It was just something that was. I obviously didn't understand like the complexities of it. I just knew like I was like, these people don't have papers. I don't really know why they don't have papers, but I also know, but then when like the news cycle started after 9/11 happened and they were targeting immigration as a way to be like, we need to be afraid of immigration and we need to close our borders because terrorists are going to use the borders to stick into our country and take America. And I was like, what fucking people are y'all talking to? Because from my lived experience, I was like, I don't know what undocumented people you all are talking about or who you know, but I was like, those are not the people that I know. I was like, I don't know who the fuck y'all talking to, right? And I keep going back to how it was so important for me to have had relationships with other people because I had lived counter narratives to the things that like the news was telling me, right? Like, and there was I had a neighbor, or there was someone who lived like near me. We weren't like next door neighbors, but we lived like in the same neighborhood, and we had gone to school together. And so him and his family, they were Indian. And I remember being afraid for my classmate because I was just like, oh my gosh, like people are, mind you, again, 7th grade, right? And I remember being terrified, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I don't want like this kid who we had like just been in school with each other for like forever. We weren't like close friends or anything, but I just remember being scared for him and his family because I was like, he looks like, because he's a dark-skinned Indian person, him and his family look like the people that the news is framing as terrorists. And there are people who are going outside beating people to death because they look like these people that this country has deemed dangerous. And now people are dying. And I'm like, that could be my classmate, again, 7th grade, right? So 9/11 to me, and there's all the other shit, right? Like how the Patriot Act passed and what happened with airports and like heightened security and how how 9/11 also led to all of these like laws that allowed for like racial profiling. So here in Arizona, SB 1070, which was basically if you look like an illegal alien, we're gonna pull you over. And I'm like, what the fuck does that even mean, right? But emphasis on look, right? Who are the people that they are looking for? Who are the people that have been deemed dangerous? And how has that shaped how we are able to be in relationship with one another? And how has that solidified white supremacy? So to bring this back to CRT, I think that people are scared of critical race theory because they recognize that critical race theory gives us the literal language to be able to name all of the things that I just named. Here's how the United States turned a terrorist attack inward and allowed for that act of 9/11 to reassert white supremacy internally as a country. And it said we need to be able to racially profile people in order to keep us safe. But who are we keeping safe? If I am an American person as a Black person, but I'm not allowed to be seen as American because of my Blackness, how is that keeping me safe? It's not. But it's keeping white people safe, but it's not keeping me safe. It wasn't keeping my classmate who I was like, please no one murder him because he's Indian, like, and not a fucking terrorist, right? It wasn't keeping him safe. So yeah, that is one of the things that like I've been thinking about is I'm like 9/11 just really highlighted how we do live in two different Americas, and how the United States has constantly used world events to reassert and to repivot white supremacy.